It really does mean a lot to us that so many of you have, in these last few years, reached out to us, supported our
Yeah.
channel. It's been one of the most humbling experiences of my life. The vast majority
It's the vast
has been
majority.
really supportive
Yeah.
and genuine connections with people that we never would have found otherwise. And that has been the driving motivation for why I continue. Welcome back to the State of the Arc podcast. My name is Mike.
My name's Kason.
For those of you listening, audio only, you probably won't hear that much of a difference. Well, you will for Kason because he's separate today. He's at home, remote. But for those of you watching, this is a totally different location. This is a temporary setup as we move our podcast set into a new location. So bear with us. It's been a huge process and kind of a nightmare for me over the last 3 or 4 days to move all this equipment in here and get it set up again. But it'll just be a couple months and we'll have a really killer set. We have some really, really cool ideas for what we want to do for that. We're no longer in the building we were at before. It's way too far north from where Kason and I live. It's not efficient to travel that far every single week, over an hour to get there. So this is temporary. Just give us a couple months. We'll have a really, really killer podcast set. And that is, of course, thanks to all of you who support us on Patreon. So thank you for that. If you would like to do that, if you appreciate what we do, links are in the description, as always. This week, because of all the trouble I've been having getting everything moved, I didn't have as much time as I would have liked to prepare for a Tactics Ogre Episode 1 podcast. So today we're doing a Q&A from our patrons. They sent us a bunch of really great questions. We're just going to kind of go into that. This will be just sort of a casual, relaxed episode, and the next week we'll get back into Tactics Ogre. Okay. Our first question here comes from Mix. How would you rank the games you've covered on the podcast? Perhaps top 5. Which games spoke to Mike and Kason the most from an intellectual as well as emotional perspective? What would be your top 5 games that we've covered on this podcast?
Well, my top one would probably be Xenogears,
Yes.
of course.
Easy.
That game was an absolute blast. I really enjoyed talking about Jacob's Ladder. That was great. Of course, a game that I have been thinking about a ton lately is Xenosaga. I've been thinking about it a lot, and I want to play the sequel soon. But that's one that, as I first played it, I was like, it's like a pretty good game. It's got some deep concepts, but the more time passes, the more drawn back to Xenosaga I feel.
Yeah,
And then, of course, Final Fantasy X was just a blast. That was probably the funnest one.
Yeah.
After Xenogears, but 10 was wonderful.
Yeah. We should be getting back to Xenosaga pretty soon. So after we finish Tactics Ogre, we have Planescape Torment on the docket after that. And then we'll be going back to do a vote on Patreon for the next one. And I think that vote is going to consist of Metal Gear Solid 2 against Xenosaga 2. I'm just going to do 2. Just a one-on-one.
Just 2. Hey, that'll be... All right.
And so you Xenosaga heads got to get on Patreon and make sure it wins, because it's going to be stiff competition against Metal Gear Solid 2.
Right.
But we have people calling for both of those games almost nonstop these days. What are you going to do? Xenosaga 2! Man, there's
a long list of games that we have to do.
A lot. Though if I were to rank what we've covered so far, if I'm just ranking like my enjoyment of the game, like the experience I had with it, I'd probably have to say that Outer Wilds was my favorite game to play. But I don't think that was my favorite podcast series. Xenogears would definitely be, I think, probably my favorite of the podcast series that we've done. And that would be my second place for one that had most impact or was most fun, I guess, to sort of cover after that. So probably Xenogears. Final Fantasy X went really, really well. I think that the way that we got into that, I got way more enjoyment out of that game than I have any other time playing it.
Oh yeah.
Honestly, I really enjoyed BioShock as well. I thought that
Yeah.
it was a real like different game than we've covered before or since. And there was a lot there too. And the fact that Ken Levine actually reached out to us after the fact
Yeah.
and thanked us for our coverage of that game was really kind of like a highlight, I guess, of everything that we've done on the channel so far. So what would that be? What have I covered so far? Xenogears,
FF10.
FF10, and then BioShock. The Final Fantasy Tactics one kind of goes under the radar a little bit for me. I don't like remember it super well, but it is like,
Right.
I think in total, maybe aside from our Final Fantasy VIII, which was our very first one, like the most viewed like consistently all the way through the series.
Yeah, people
It
seem
was
to
a really
love that
popular one. Yeah, and I just love Final Fantasy Tactics in general, so I'd probably say that one would be next.
Yeah,
That'd be number 4. And then, honestly, Silent Hill 2, I really, really liked that one as well. It's a game I haven't
That's another
played in
one
a
I
super
often
long
think
time.
about.
Yeah. And, I don't know, just again, different from what we typically cover. And, I don't know, it was a lot of fun. So I'd say those are my top 5. All right, this next one comes from Sam Lowe. He says, I enjoy writing on the side and have been tinkering with a fantasy novel that has never really materialized or gone anywhere after years. A big part of why is that I cannot get past doubting myself, worrying that if anyone read it, they would think it was crap and just plain, which would just be plain embarrassing. It's to the point where I don't think I will ever be finished or publish it, even if it was like ready, right? I would try to do it under a pen name so that nobody knew that it was me. The subject matter isn't even anything embarrassing, but I just can't get past the self-doubt. How did you get past this or learn to ignore that specific voice in your head? Any advice other than to stop thinking this way?
Of course, that is advice number 1.
This actually ties into another question we got from someone else. It's basically the same thing now that I'm looking at it. So I kind of want to read that one too while we're at it. But it's basically, how do you get over imposter syndrome? And that came from... Oh, there we go. From Devin Perry. How do you get over imposter syndrome? I'm a prospective filmmaker, videographer, etc., and I actively discourage myself from working due to imposter syndrome. It's borderline crippling. Have you guys run into this in your careers, and what mental work did you do to get through it? Those are kind of similar questions, or they're at least adjacent, so figured we'd answer those in one go. Do you have any thoughts on that first?
Yeah, first off, on the second one, the imposter syndrome in particular, there's a great series called Everything is a Remix. It's actually old. It's like 10 years ago. Some guy made it. I think he put it up on Vimeo initially. I don't know. You can probably find it anywhere now. It was pretty popular at the time. But once you realize just how little originality there is in the world and how much everything is kind of recycled and rehashed over and over and over, I feel like, at least for me, that made me feel a lot better about when I felt like I was drawing too much from somebody else's work and pretending that it was mine, you know? There's a lot of artists, very famous artists, in particular Beyonce. She goes around and she steals stuff from people and uses it in her own music and in her own shows. And it's, you know, you got to worry to some extent about copyright infringement, but for the most part, like, everything's fair game. Like, stories that you've heard before, you can remake the stories and call it a new thing, and the likelihood is that you'll be fine if you do that. So as soon as I realized that, like, George Lucas basically copied, like, shot for shot, tons of old old movies, and like the movie's Kill Bill is just completely derivative, copying stuff that's been done over and over and over. And these are Quentin Tarantino and George Lucas. You know, these are some big names. And once you realize that that's what everybody's doing, at least for me, that helped me a little bit to kind of get over that.
Yeah. I wish I had advice to share on this, but I don't, because I struggle with both tremendously all the time. I mean, I guess maybe that's not the best answer, given the fact that we're at least here online, like doing a show, like showing our work to thousands and thousands of people. But it's tough because I go back to anything. I mean, almost anything that I've made that is older than 6 months, and I hate it. I hate watching it. I hate revisiting it. There's very, very little that of the work that I've done that I can look back on and feel like genuinely proud of, without like nitpicking it, feeling like, oh gosh, we should have done that. I should have done this. There probably are a couple examples of that, but for the most part, I always end up sort of like hyper focused on the ways in which it was inadequate. And so I wish you the best in finding a way to deal with it, particularly if it's so crippling that it's getting you to a point where you're not releasing any of your work, right? It's like keeping you from doing it. I don't know if there's anything specifically I've done to get over the feeling, because obviously I'm putting my work on the internet, but I would say just do it anyways. Like, even though you're not proud of it, even though, because I mean, that's how I feel, but that's the only way you get better, is maybe the silver lining in it. Like, if you want to be better than you are, if you are feeling like, you know, your work's inadequate, you're not good enough, all of this, putting your work out there, even though it's scary, maybe just change the way you're thinking about it. Instead of putting it out there and hoping that, you know, people will appreciate the work, do it because you're afraid, as a challenge of like, I'm going to do something. I'm facing a fear with this. I'm not putting it out there because I expect it's good, or because I expect whatever, for whatever reason, or even because I want feedback on it. Do it because there's something in you saying no, and you just want to like take control of that in your life and be like, no, I get to say what I put out there, not my fears or inadequacies or whatever. I don't know, man. I don't have a great answer, but just do it anyways is kind of like the best advice I think anyone could give, because you're not going to get over the feeling. Right. That's the thing about fears, right? Like, you're not going to get to a point where, oh, now I feel courageous, so I can do it. Courage is about doing something when you're afraid of it, not getting over the fear. Oh, I feel brave now. That's not the way that works. You do something even though you're afraid. You do it anyways. That's kind of the only thing you can do. I saw you were going to say something there.
I did have one thought, which is, instead of, to have a specific idea of who you're writing to. I always kind of wanted to write a book, but never made any progress on it ever until I had kids. And actually, the way I've been approaching my book in general is I'm writing a book thinking of my kids as the audience. And I tell my kids stories all the time. So if you have like one friend or one sibling or one family member, neighbor, somebody like that, one person that you know about, and just write the story for them, and just write a cool story that they'll like. And you don't have to worry about everyone in the whole world hating or loving your work and whatever pressure that creates. Just like tell a story for one person and they'll be stoked. Yeah. They'll be stoked to get the story, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think if not, then pick a different person.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to look at it. And I guess as a last part of answering this question, my novel has not really moved forward at all in probably a year, 2 years. No, probably 2 years now. Because of all the same things that you're talking about. I feel all of that same pressure, inadequacy, needing to fix it. I even paid pretty good amount of money to have it professionally edited, and I still didn't feel like it was good enough. And so I didn't send it to very many, literary agents or really try that hard to get it published because I felt like, no, I got to fix it. I got to make it better. It sucks, blah, blah, blah. So just know we struggle with the same stuff. It's not easy. Okay. I should have combined this one with the first question. Okay, but there's a couple of added things, so maybe that we can just use this as like a little bit to add to the end of the first question by Mix. This is from Luciano. Every game movie covered on the channel so far, which has been your favorite? I think we both said Xenogears, right?
Yeah.
Which did you learn the most from?
Xenogears.
Xenogears. I would say the same. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which would you revisit, if any? It's probably going to be Xenogears, right?
Xenogears. Yes.
Which did you have the most fun with?
Oh.
That one's maybe not necessarily Xenogears, although Xenogears would be really high up there.
Oh, was a blast, but maybe Final Fantasy X for that one for me.
Yeah, Final Fantasy X. Which one did I have the most fun with? Xenogears, I can't say I had the most fun with. That one was probably the most stressful because it required like the most research and the most like trying so hard to be accurate when like recounting, Carl Jung stuff.
Yeah.
And like
Karen Horney and that was the very first podcast we did weekly, right?
It was, yes.
There was some added stress there too,
Yeah,
to make sure everything was smooth.
Yeah. The most fun I want to say it was probably Outer Wilds. It was just a joy, like every single week to play the game and to like come back and talk about it. Like I was just having a blast with the game. So I would say that one probably the most fun to cover. Probably because there wasn't any expectation in it either. It wasn't like with Xenogears, there's tons of pressure or almost expectation from other Xenogears experts out there, right? Like to get it right, to report on it accurately, to get the story, explain the story accurately is just like a huge amount of pressure. But with Outer Wilds, none of that was there because it was our first time playing the game. We were kind of more just talking about how we felt while playing it. It's a more interpretive piece, I feel like, just generally. Yeah. And so there's not a lot you can necessarily get wrong, although we did. But I mean, like in the overall analysis sense, there's less you can get wrong, I feel like. So right. I felt less pressure with that one. Okay, thank you for the question. This one comes from Melanie Tyler. You two seem to have a really incredible friendship. Typically, men aren't socialized or necessarily encouraged to deeply or frequently connect with each other the way that you seem to. So it's really lovely to see. What are some of the ways that you've checked in with each other and kept your foundation strong for multiple decades now? I'm going to lead off with this one and say, I know for sure that I could be way better at this. It comes across, I think, maybe a little stronger on camera than maybe it actually is in real life. And that's because I am an enormous recluse in real life. I really struggle with keeping up with people. I'm one of those people where you text me and I might respond like 3 or 4 weeks later a lot of times. It drives my family crazy. My brothers and my parents, they'll text me. I think they're sort of more understanding about it now, but it used to be more of a problem. Like, dude, why are you not responding? And it's just because for me, I just feel a lot of pressure. Like this whole weekend, getting all of this stuff moved in. I mean, I was staying up till 3, 4 a.m. every day, troubleshooting, trying to get it working, trying to set up schedules with the internet guy because it wasn't working up here. That didn't even get fixed until like just a couple hours ago. So on top of, working full time and having deadlines and all kinds of other things. So I tend to get really overwhelmed by just life generally. And so what that does is it makes it to where the thought of connecting, sending messages, checking up on people, hanging out is really an exhausting thought. And so I tend to just avoid. So I'm glad that the connection comes across as being strong on camera. It's what I want it to be. I think that we've been friends long enough now and know each other well enough to where
a very long time.
There's so much history that can kind of just like get flipped on, right? And there's a real, I guess, chemistry there. But I definitely feel like I could be much better at keeping that connection strong and alive outside of just like recording this podcast, right?
Gotcha. I'd probably agree in terms of for myself as well. One thing is that the hand of fate has kept us in proximity since we were like 8 years old, and for whatever reason, we've moved around, and like our parents would maybe take different jobs, and we'd end up in different places. We would always end up really, really close to each other, close enough to where we were always able to make things work. Because I don't know, we just Mike and I now have a relationship which is something along the lines of where we can even just hang out and not even have to like say much to each other.
Yeah, right.
But it's cool. It's not like awkward and weird. Like I've known Mike for so long at this point. It's I don't know, like there's no it is not very common that we will have like a misunderstanding or anything like that. Mm-hmm. So, and plus we both bring kind of open like open minds kind of to things, and we both know that as things change, we both changed a lot in 25 years. How long have I known you? Well,
I mean, 1999, so that's 24, coming up on 25 next fall. Man. Yeah, it would be like late August, maybe early September 2024 would be 25 years. Yeah,
it's crazy. But yeah, that's where that comes from. Like sometimes you'll see people on podcasts and they're two actors that have been placed together and they have to like figure out how to make things work. But Mike and I have genuinely been, very good friends for 25 years. So, I mean, there's just, if it comes across on screen, that's why, there's something you just can't fake.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, again, I want to stress like reading that comment from you, like made me almost feel guilt.
I know, I could tell in your voice. I could tell. But just so everyone knows, Mike came to my daughter's birthday party this year.
Yeah, I did.
And anyways, he's not a total 100% recluse.
When I actually get into social environments, I do well. Like it's not like, oh, I'm feeling all this social anxiety, I'm overwhelmed, I gotta leave, I gotta run away. Like I can talk and like have a good time. It's almost just the act of getting there. A lot of times at the end of a day I tend to carry a lot of stress and stuff like that, and so it can feel like, oh, there's no way I can do that. But if I just do it, ends up being fine. You just
believe in yourself.
Just believe. But no, this is I'm glad you sent the question, because I really do actually want to be way better with this. Just before we signed on, I reached out to a couple of friends I haven't talked to in a long time, specifically because of this. So I'm going to try and be a lot better about it. But what Kaysen said, I think is very true. It's almost like we're at a point where that's not a problem. Like
right.
It's whether it's been 5 years since we've last talked or whether it's been yesterday. The time spent together would probably be more or less the same.
Yeah.
And it's true, because I have gone much longer periods without talking to your brothers, for instance, but yet every time, I see them again, it's kind of the same way. It's kind of just like you pick up exactly where you left off, as if no time had passed.
Yep.
Okay. Let's move on to Jonah the Man here. Are there any movies, games, books, or etc. which you personally love but have a difficult time recommending to others because they're too esoteric?
Oh gosh, like every book. So a friend of mine, this is actually my brother Parker's wife. She was reading not Artemis, what was it? She was reading Oh, dang it. The guy who wrote the book of The Martian,
Oh
he
yes,
wrote a space exploration book recently. I can't remember what it's called anymore, unfortunately.
dude, I got to read
But it
that.
wasn't Artemis, but it's the one where they go to a different like solar system. And I I read that book on her recommendation basically in like 2 days because I found the audiobook and I like, double sped it and I just kind of like listened to it at work. And I was able to come back a day or two later because she was vacationing here for like, 5 days or something. And we were able to talk about the book for the last like couple days. And so she goes, okay, well, since you read one of my books, now I feel obligated. What book of yours do you think I should read? My initial recommendation was what is it? Oh gosh, what is it called now? See, I'm forgetting all my book names now. A History of Consciousness by Eric Neumann. What's it
Yes.
called? The History and Something of Consciousness. Anyways, and well, I didn't hear back from her for a very long time, so I sent her another one back saying, "Okay, you don't have to read The Origin and History of Consciousness. Maybe instead just read." Because I knew she was a psychology major in
Right.
college. I was like, "Oh, you should read Ian McGilchrist's The Master and His Emissary. That one's probably more for you." Anyways, I don't think she read that either because I haven't really talked to her in a while. But it's kind of funny. It's like a little embarrassing. I'm like, why don't I read normal books? Like she would probably like it was a fiction book that she recommended to me, and I
Right.
just went and read it quickly because I was able to find it. But like the books that I read are either like children's fairy tales because I freaking love those, and I have 1,000 of them for my kids, or just like nonfiction stuff. And so whenever people ask me for recommendations, I give them, but I would say it's probably about this success rate in terms of them actually reading it.
Yeah, I would say I have an easy time recommending stuff to my friends online because my friends online are people who
That's a
found
different
us
story.
through the podcast or through our channel in
Yeah.
the past, right? So they're all people who are interested in the same stuff anyway. But if I were to try to recommend anything we've covered on our podcast to someone else I know in real life outside of like Kaysen and maybe your brothers, but even then, I don't know if like even Parker would be that interested in like Xenosaga or Xenogears necessarily.
Yeah,
He would have when we were growing up, but I don't
for
know.
sure.
Well, I don't know now, right?
Now I wonder.
But maybe Eric would be like maybe the one other person. But again, I feel like he just wouldn't really have time for it. But yeah, I mean, my parents will, a lot of people, it's not even just recommendations of, hey, you should try this game I'm playing or something like that. It's more even just trying to explain what I've been up to people who don't follow me.
Yes.
That
Like your
it
parents
feels like
or-
I
yes,
just nothing much like it's
rather than
impossible.
explain, I just nothing. I do
even
nothing.
even that is hard. It's like such a tasking thing to even think to try to explain because it would
Yeah.
require that they be familiar with a lot of the stuff
Yeah.
we've been talking about and reading and playing and watching, and they aren't. So I can't have any real conversation about it because we'd be like, oh, what have you been up to? Oh, I just finished this podcast on Jacob's Ladder, a movie which you've never heard of, will never watch, and probably would hate if you did. And
Like if you don't understand it, yeah. If you just
Right.
think it's a horror film, yeah.
and so like I can't, so I might as well just not even bring it up.
Yeah, I've been
You know?
noticing that the chasm of things that I used to be so good at relating to other people before, just a few years ago. I am so I don't know where to start now because often if I ever want to explain, if we talk about what I want to talk about, it's just not going to happen, first of all. But I'd be basically just lecturing them for an hour before they're at
Right.
a point where they can they even understand what at all I'm trying to convey.
Yeah.
So, and it's not that it's necessarily high level stuff. It's mostly just like theoretical and I don't know. It's funny, but
well, like entry
I know some
level
things-
psychology and physics and
Sure.
things, but like still for the normal layman, even that is just not a conversation they care to have.
Yes. I basically have to start with Freud when I talk to people about this, but I have to spend the first 20 minutes convincing them that even though their idea of Freud is all screwed up because of however they learned him in high school, that they should actually take him more seriously. And I have to like convince them of that first, and then we can move
Yes.
to Jung and whatever else.
Right.
And it's just like, it's just not worth the trouble, really. Most
Well,
of the
yeah,
time.
that's lecture is a good word for it. Like,
Yeah.
they're coming to me wanting a conversation, but to have a conversation would require a lecture first, and I don't think anyone's interested in that. So yeah,
Not
it's
so
almost
much.
harder to just have a conversation about what I've been doing in my life, much
Sure,
less
something else.
try to recommend any of it to somebody to consume in their free time. So anyway.
Yeah.
This one comes from Devin Perry. Hey guys, any advice on coping? Well, I already read that one. Sorry. Next one. Andrew. Linden Schmidt, I think is his. Andrew Linden Schmidt. Final Fantasy VII, when? I know it's probably been asked, and people will say it's been done to death, but I think your analysis is pretty much one of a kind. I don't want to hear someone else's analysis, lol. It's not even my favorite in the series, but I think it would be a great podcast series.
Okay. Not never.
Not never.
Not never is when we're doing FF7.
Yeah.
That's about all I know.
Man, it's really, really hard to say when this will happen. There is a part of me that if this weren't a partnership in terms of running this channel, I would be tempted to say never. I'm not going to do that because Kaysen hasn't been involved in the same conversations I've been involved in, or even the general discourse of Final Fantasy VII, and has likely not been fatigued to complete oblivion by it like I have. It's really almost kind of a touchy subject at this point for me. Not that I am upset that you asked the question. I think it's fine. And I think it's fine for people to be curious and to wonder when it's going to happen. But I guess it has not only surprised me, but been just sort of generally disappointing. And again, I don't want to say this in a way that disparages anyone else, because I'm not trying to do that. I'm not trying to say anything about anyone else or their feelings about Final Fantasy VII or the compilation material or the remake project or anything like that. I'm just trying to get my thoughts out there. And I really respect a lot of people who disagree with me on the topic of the remake. So it's nothing like that. But what I valued about Final Fantasy VII seems to not be in line with what the majority of people who loved Final Fantasy VII back in the day valued about it. Because
Interesting.
the things that were important to me that be retained as far as like the remake project and any sort of sequel or whatever in the compilation, those things have not been intact and have been almost subverted on purpose to a point that has been really frustrating for me, because it seems to be favoring things that a lot of other people really loved about it, but not the things that I really loved about it. And so where that has left me is in a position where if people want me to give any commentary on Final Fantasy VII as it stands today in the public discourse and in sort of just like the general audience's eye, what I have to say about it is not valuable to them, and vice versa almost, right? So it's like I can't, I feel like as badly as I would want to explain my perspective on what made that game special to me and analyze it, it would be under the lens of the 1997 project alone. And I would not want to include anything outside of that. But that's what everybody else would want. Everybody else would want, or would expect maybe even, well, you've made this
I don't
comment.
know that they would expect it, because we usually do the one game and we purposely make it like we're not talking about Xenosaga 2, we're not talking about anything else, you know.
Well, what I mean is, if I'm analyzing something about Cloud's character, right? And I put it this way based on the text of what's in Final Fantasy VII 1997.
Yeah.
People will come who will watch that podcast and be like, well, what about this and this and this from Crisis Core or from the remake or from whatever? You're not considering that. That's also canon, and that should be considered. And so what you're saying is actually inaccurate. But I would be purposefully leaving that out because that stuff, in terms of what it has added or, dare I say, taken away from what I valued about the original game, is not something that resonates with me or that I would want to focus on or that I think is a retcon or contradictory to the original material. So because of this, it leaves me in a position where I don't think there's anything I could do to make a podcast series or a long form analysis that I would be happy with and also the audience would be happy with.
That's fine.
and maybe that is fine. Maybe I just get over that feeling and just say what I want to say. But it would certainly be something a lot of the audience would not enjoy. And I mean, we've just gotten through that with Final Fantasy 16, right? We got to the end of that.
Yeah.
And there were a lot of people who were quite upset about where we landed at the end of that. And I've had.
I wish at least one of us liked it more. I think. Like I liked
that
it.
Would
okay.
help.
It's not a bad game. But the fact that we both kind of landed in a little bit of that iffy territory was. We should have brought somebody else on. I don't know.
And here's the thing, the core principle upon which we are doing everything in terms to our YouTube channel is meant to be deepening our audience's appreciation for the thing.
Yeah.
So, I with Final Fantasy 16 going the way that it did, I don't want to ever do that again. I don't want to play something and analyze it unless I know it's something that I really, really deeply appreciate and want to help others deeply appreciate. If it's something that I'm going to have caveats or a lot of criticisms for along the way, it's probably just not something we should really even talk about.
Okay, I know what to do.
Go ahead.
Very beginning, episode 1, we just tell everybody that right now it is December 1997, and we are not. This is a time machine. We went back in time. We know nothing about anything else relating to Final Fantasy VII except for this one game. And any comments that are about anything in the future, that's just speculation, or it's just it's
hasn't happened. That's not real.
What are
it
you
doesn't
talking
exist.
About? We need to create a resonant arc cinematic universe where those things. We need to create an alternate timeline, is what I'm saying, and we need to put ourselves into 1997 and review it from that, and just make it very clear that we are 90s people and we are not. We have dial-up internet and we don't do any of this other stuff that you guys are talking about. Like that doesn't make sense to us.
The reason you're receiving this broadcast is because we're actually using magic. It's not the technology.
Exactly. But one day you'll understand.
That's not a bad idea. To at least be very
we can head off a lot of criticism.
To be very forthright or transparent right from the start that we are not looking at anything outside of this. And if that's something you want, like this is not the podcast for you, kind of a deal, right? I'm open to that. And here's the thing. I know we have to do it. So that's why I'm saying the answer can't be never. It would only be never if it was just me, myself running this this channel. But that's not fair to Case.
I want to look at it. I want to analyze it and figure out what's going on there. And I really want to hear you. What you have just done is make me and probably a lot more people even way more interested in what you would have to say in an analysis of that game than previous. People already wanted to hear what you had to say, and now, if I'm any bellwether to go by, people are really interested in what you're going to say now.
Yeah, jeez. Well, okay, I'll just say this, and then we'll move on because we can't linger on this too long. It's gotten to a point where, again, I really don't want to disparage anybody. I really don't. If you enjoyed the remake project and you're excited for Rebirth, I genuinely like am happy for you, and I hope that you love it, and I hope it's everything you expect and more, and that you just have tons of fun with it. I am not trying to, ruin anybody's fun, which is why I haven't talked about this in a very long time, and why I'm avoiding talking about it until this remake project at least is over, right? Even revisiting the original in any way. But it's gotten to the point where I have blocked online any term that has to do with Final Fantasy VII or Final Fantasy VII Remake or Tifa or Cloud or Sephiroth or Shinra or Midgar or Hojo or Materia. Like anything that has to do with that game, I have blocked the term online because I just don't want to see it anymore. I'm so tired of it. And you can say, maybe and it is probably true. That's just something that's on you. That's a you problem, you're saying to me. And I'm agreeing with you. It is. For some reason, it's hard for me to let go because of how much that game meant to me, right? And how much there is like a passion in me to want to cover it in the way that we would in a podcast series. So I yearn for that opportunity to do it. It's something I have a deep passion about, but I feel like it just would never really have the result in the end that something like our Xenogears analysis did, or any of the others that we've done that people were super appreciative that we covered. And it would not help deepen people's appreciation unless they think exactly like we do, or I should say I do, about this. And I know there are people like that out there, and maybe they are the ones I should be making that podcast for. But we're getting older now. Those of us who grew up with the game are not in the majority on this. And, or I should say, those of us who grew up with the game and also don't appreciate the direction they've taken with the remake project. We are in the minority on this issue, and I just don't want to be that guy, who seems to be stampeding or ruining everybody's fun. That's just not at all what I'm about, and that's not what this channel is about. And so it's a very difficult thing for me to even come around on how would I go about doing that without talking about this at all, like you say, and making just a strong disclaimer. We're pretending nothing else exists, which might feel elitist to people. So you lose that way. Or you open up some dialogue for it, try to discuss why you feel this or different or whatever. And then you have the result of what our podcast several years ago when the game came out, the first remake game came out. And just endless, I think really toxic sort of debates and people not willing to be respectful and understand where we're coming from. And it's just not something I want to deal with again. So how do we come around on this? Like Kason said, not never.
Do you have any 1990s shirts left? I got an Aquabats shirt and a Metallica shirt. Let's just legit change your hair. Pretend actually my hair fits 90s pretty well.
Yeah, it does.
Just make it as believable as possible. Let's broadcast in standard def. Let's interlace the
dude. I could put the
into the 90s, physically transport them to the 90s.
Yeah, let's do a 4:3 aspect ratio.
Yes.
Let's do the all those CRT filters that Beardmo helped me set up.
Yes,
we could run it through
lines
that
as if it's a VHS tape or something.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. We'll just make it look like we shot it in the 1990s.
And then, come on, dudes. When this was filmed, don't give us modern criticism. This is a 90s video.
Yeah. Okay. Let's move on here. We got Thomas. Okay. In games and in films, the trend of remakes, reboots, and reimagining of existing IPs seems to never end. I have tried to attribute the similarity of a Shakespeare play being set up again and again by new theater companies and groups. But theater is the art of the moment, and in a way is always new. So that's kind of the way it is, right? When it comes to games, you have the argument of introducing an older IP to a new generation, preservation, nostalgia, and the high cost of new games, etc. Apart from the practical arguments, you have the thing that perhaps our culture is not doing so well, and it is reflected in the lack of news stories. In the indie space, there are, of course, new experiences to be had, but in the AAA space and the companies with a legacy, it seems to me, they are more prone to hash out a remake, remaster, or AAA game that feels like every other. What do you think, and why is the cause that we are in this remake reissue of older titles era? I just saw a thing the other day. Who was the publisher? I can't remember the publisher. I really can't. I wish I did. I wish I had saved this so I could look it up right now. But I didn't realize this question was coming. But it was basically a tweet, an article that was saying modern audiences are only interested in remakes and sequels, and so we will no longer be making new intellectual properties. We'll be focusing our efforts on existing popular franchises and remakes going forward.
It sounds like Hollywood has come to a similar conclusion.
Yes. And I think I know the reason why.
Yeah.
The reason why isn't because creators are bankrupt, creatively bankrupt right now. It's not because there aren't great news stories to tell, or even that the people making these projects would rather be doing new stuff. It has nothing to do with that. It has everything to do with the fact that for some reason, the ballooning costs of the most cutting edge film, I don't want to even say cutting edge as much as just technologically advanced game development and movie making is what makes the biggest money. So we want to make $1 billion on this movie. So we have to spend this much money on these extravagant freaking high concept, heavy CGI and concepts. And in order to mitigate the risk as much as possible on that, it needs to be something a huge amount of people are already familiar with and excited about. Instead of just saying, let's make a new story or a new game or whatever as a big studio, but let's scale down on what we would typically do for the biggest budget possible thing. Let's limit ourselves on purpose. Let's scale the team down, and let's do something where we're really limited and see what comes out of that creatively, right? We're only spending this much. But the great thing is then you don't have to make $1 billion on the project for it to be successful, and then it becomes over time a known property and one that people are excited about, and it grows into that. It's almost like they want what a Final Fantasy 17 could sell in a Forspoken, some brand new IP. So they're going to put all the same resources, all the same amount of money, the same completely out of control ballooning team sizes and effort into a Forspoken game so that it can be what is expected from a AAA project in terms of graphical fidelity and performance and open world and all this other stuff. And it's got to look and feel like a Final Fantasy 17, even though it's a brand new thing that nobody's played before. That, to me, is the real problem. The lack of a willingness for a behemoth publisher out there who feels like their expectation is to hit this sort of production quality, right? It's got to be here. So if it's going to be there, then we're going to have this many people that we're going to need to work on it and this much time and this much money. So then in order for it to be profitable, it has to be making billions of dollars.
Yep.
So we're not going to do that on a new thing. That's only going to be possible on Call of Duty 76 or whatever.
Yeah.
And so if they would just be willing to scale down, I think Hellblade is like a really good example of what I'm talking about.
Yes, you can be cutting edge on some things. Yet it doesn't have to be everything. You can be
Yeah.
cutting edge on some things and create a moderately successful game that generates you money because it didn't cost you $30
Yeah.
billion to make.
Yes. Hellblade Senua's
Yeah.
Sacrifice is a perfect example of what I'm talking about. You can make something that feels pretty close to a
Yeah.
AAA experience, but it's got a concept that scales it down to such a degree that a small team could make it. And then from there, when that becomes a huge success, because the concept was so unique and it was unlike anything people had seen in a lot of ways, then Microsoft comes in and buys that company and wants a sequel to it. Like, that's how you do it. You don't start Hellblade with the same budget as Call of Duty. You start Hellblade as something smaller. You polish it in the ways that you can, but you scale it down to fit. And I feel like when you're limited like that, and all the research I've done on Final Fantasy development history, they all say the same thing. They all sort of miss the pixel art Super Nintendo and NES days because they were so limited back then. They couldn't do whatever they wanted, and they felt like they were more creative in that time.
Oh, for
And
sure.
that's exactly what that does. So, go ahead.
No, I totally agree with you. Certain laws produce freedom, right? Like freedom, you would think that freedom means zero constraints, but no, freedom means some constraints that can direct you to be able to do, to be more free to express yourself within certain constraints. Actually makes the art better, more believable, all that kind of stuff. I've always said in the past, like, I like Harvest Moon 64, but if Namco, or is it Bandai Namco, if they had, or Natsume, if Natsume had decided to make Harvest Moon 64, but in the style of Super Harvest Moon, then it would have been Stardew Valley, something like that, right?
Yeah.
Instead, they scaled the world really down, and they made Harvest Moon 64, which is a great game. But they could have had a grander scale. They could have really outdone themselves in a different way. But instead, they always had to be on the cutting edge all the time. And I feel like maybe it's an image thing. Maybe Square Enix doesn't want to be viewed.
I think that's exactly what it is. Yes,
that makes like not the best looking games out there.
I mean, they have tried like with that other studio that made like and those didn't do super well. And so they have said recently we're no longer focusing on the mid-budget stuff.
Right.
But it's like
maybe they overspent on those. You really didn't need to overspend.
Yes. It's about scaling down. Concept, everything, scaling down. Finding something that's super unique and creative that doesn't cost a lot of money, and so therefore if you lose, it's not a huge risk. I think that's really the answer, that more big developers, you still have your tent poles. That's the whole point. You still have your Call of Duties and you still have your big Final Fantasy releases. Those still happen. But you should be able to have like in the periphery of that, like 3 or 4 other creative projects going on that, one of those might break out.
And honestly though, Nintendo is really good at this.
Yep, they are.
So you're still getting, I don't know, Nintendo is good at making these games that they feel smooth, they feel tight, but it's like a smaller kind of game. Like what was that punching game for the Switch? I can't remember what it's called.
Arms, wasn't it?
Yeah, or Splatoon, or just whatever they've got going on. They're constantly doing new things, but Nintendo does not have the expectation that Square Enix has. Nintendo can make a silly cartoony looking game and people will buy it. But if Square Enix does it, it's like, ooh, Square Enix, they must be scaling back. They must be in trouble. They're making cartoony games. Some of it might be a brand management issue.
Yeah. It's always a management issue. And I think this is actually more the result of a company becoming publicly traded and having huge expectations
Yeah.
than anything else. It's once your company is publicly traded, you have stockholders and investors to please. Like this is going to become an issue because they're the ones you got to generate them a lot of money. And I honestly feel like it should be illegal to publicly trade a corporation at this point.
Ooh, geez.
I
There's only
freaking
a few.
hate the whole idea of it.
I know it's like death. It's awful. And then a board gets created that usurps power from the original founders, and then they lose the company, and then this board owns everything, but it's designed by committee, which is like a garbage way to design. But investing has been pretty good for the pharmaceuticals. I'll just put it that way.
Yeah, exactly. It's horrible.
But there's some industries. Anyways, for the most part, I totally agree with you.
All right. Let's fly through some of these here.
Okay.
Wesley Rhodes. I have two questions if it's okay. First one for Kaysen. What is your favorite part of learning a new language? Speaking, reading, or listening?
My favorite part or my first part?
Favorite.
Favorite. Gosh, listening, because I enjoy consuming media and the like in that language. Reading, I don't know. Reading's fine if I'm reading it out loud or if I'm following along while I listen. I do not usually enjoy speaking. I've become very self-conscious when I speak. But I do enjoy listening quite a bit because I'm not necessarily learning a new language in order to, like, it's nice that I can now communicate with other people. It's very nice and it helps and I do it a lot. But I'm mostly doing it so that I can learn from that culture more directly, or I can learn about that culture more directly, or so I can consume media and other things from that culture that I want to have that kind of an experience, and less so that I actually really want to get to know people from that persuasion. Lately, I've been reading Beowulf, and I've slowly realized that I have an Old English and modern English translation, has both. And I've slowly realized how difficult it is in learning Old English right now, how hard it is to preserve the poetry of something like that across the languages.
Oh, really?
I remember, oh yeah, really hard. Oh, once I heard somebody from Japan or Korea was learning English, and they said the reason they wanted to learn English so bad was so they can read Shakespeare in English. And at the time, this was probably more than 10 years ago. At the time, I was like, just read a translation of Shakespeare. It's the same thing. Like, come on, like, what's the big deal? You can. Why do you need to read it in English, right? But the more that I've been, immersing myself in this kind of stuff, and specifically reading poetry, getting into things like Goethe's Faust or Dante's Inferno or Beowulf, I'm slowly realizing, like, whoa, I actually am beginning to value heavily the experience of these texts in the original language. But I do just want to emphasize that for me, it's not so much about speaking to other humans. Yeah, at least that's not what drives me. What really drives me, because I just live here in Utah, I have no need for that. What really drives me is to experience another culture, is to listen, to kind of live and see how they live, and it's I've got that kind of approach to it.
Sure. He also asks, he's going to Japan. Is there anywhere that you would recommend that he visits while he's there?
Gosh, everywhere. I've been from Hiroshima up to Chiba. I don't know. There's a lot there. Like, go to Kyoto, go to Osaka. Osaka was my favorite city by far. Osaka is so much fun. There's so much to do there. It's a little more fun than Tokyo. It's a little more happening. It's also a little more authentic Japanese than Tokyo. Tokyo, there's English on the street signs. Like, you can get by Tokyo pretty well without knowing any Japanese. Osaka, sort of that way, but less so. And then Kyoto, and then Nara. Nara is a city kind of in between Osaka and Kyoto that is where all the old Japanese temples are. It used to be the capital of Japan like 600 years ago. So yeah, check that out.
Before Edo.
Yes, before the Edo Jidai. The Edo era.
Then he asks me if when I'm writing a character who's like going through a difficult experience if I try to emphasize with them or feel the same emotions. I do. And that's why, for the most part, I listen to music while I write, and I have specific playlists that elicit specific emotions for me. So I've talked about this a little bit in a video I did about how music moves us, how music affects our emotions, and I explained a little bit more there. So I'd maybe recommend watching that video. But specifically, music for me is almost more of a spiritual experience than it is like an analytical or secular one. Like I've just never had the desire. Like I can read sheet music, but I don't like to do it. I like to feel music and learn it by ear and like kind of just like connect with it rather than like put it down on paper with notation and like analyze it. I'm the total opposite with music than I am with, say, like storytelling or something like that. So I play music in the background to make me feel an emotion, and then I try to write what the character, like the character's dialogue, I let it come to me through that emotion. So that's kind of the way I try to approach writing. So I'm always listening to something at the same time, as far as music goes. This one comes from Netro, who we have not heard from in a long time. Thank you so much.
I've heard a few names
reaching
here that I'm like stoked about.
How you doing, Netro? Thanks for the comment or for the question. I remember you guys talking a lot about what a Zelda movie could be with its recent announcement. I don't even know if you heard of this.
Yeah. Oh, yes, there are whispers.
A movie being in the works. What are your current hopes and expectations, if any, for it?
Well, they have said specifically it is going to be live action Zelda. Yep. So it's not my hope was cartoon. Okay, well, given the nature of the, what was it, a PR release, whatever it was, I'm thinking, gosh, I don't know. I hope they don't screw it up, but I also don't really care to watch it. I very reluctantly watched the Mario. Movie,
oh yeah, I didn't see
Mario
that.
movie. It's good. It's fun. I'm glad I watched it, but I held off for a long time, and I just didn't really care to watch it. It's fun. It's funny. It's interesting. I'm actually afraid that they're going to do to Zelda what they did with Mario there, because it works for Mario. Just the silliness, the funniness. If they go that way with Zelda, I don't know. If it's bad, it's bad. I'm not that excited about it. We'll put it that way.
Yeah. So to kind of touch on what he was alluding to there in the beginning, there was a time where Kaysen and Landon and his brother, or Kaysen and his brother Landon and I, who were all working on the same YouTube channel together at the time, began the process, the pre-production process of writing a live-action Zelda movie. We were it was a big dream of ours to be the directors of like a big live-action Legend of Zelda film.
Yeah,
we watched very excitedly the projects other people were doing at the time to kind of see what they did. Fan made films, right? I would say the closest we ever really came to achieving that particular goal was we did a short film on Skyrim that was done on a fairly large budget for Machinima Prime at the time.
Yeah, for what it was, yeah.
We felt like we were cutting our teeth, or at least I did at the time, on what we really wanted to do, which was like a high fantasy, like epic film in the vein of something like Lord of the Rings for The Legend of Zelda. Let's see, how old were we at that time? I was probably 26 or something like that. I am now 36. It has been 10 years plus since that time. And I am now convinced that there doesn't need to be any film adaptation of a video game at all. It just is not necessary. And in fact, you're losing something integral.
Yes, that's what I'm worried about.
Yeah. I mean, with The Witcher that was recently done. Now, I haven't seen The Last of Us yet. The Last of Us is apparently very good. And I'm not even saying you can't make it and have it be very good. Like, I think The Witcher could be made, especially since it was, well, that was more being adapted from the books anyways. That wasn't being adapted from a video game. The point is you can do a very good adaptation of The Last of Us or some video game. And I would hope, or I would think the purpose of that would be to reach an audience that does not play games. So my dad is never going to play a video game. But if there's a film made and it's a very faithful, really well-made adaptation of something I love, that's something I can share with him. He can be like, oh, this is a cool story. However, there is something integral about that you lose in the jump from a game to a movie that cannot be translated, and that is the participation on the part of the player in that role that you take up of that character and playing it a certain way, particularly in RPGs. Now, Zelda's not an RPG, but how you went about it, the way that the discovery you felt as you explored that world is not the same thing. It cannot be replicated as a film. And so I'm not saying that as by any means saying it shouldn't happen. No one should go about trying to adapt a video game into a movie. I'm just saying there is something integral that you lose that for me has made me less and less interested in seeing them happen. When I was growing up, that's all I wanted to see was a live-action Legend of Zelda movie. That's all I wanted to see was a live-action Shadow of the Colossus movie. It was almost like that was the ultimate expression or form of the art. And so, if it could escape just being a game and make it to being a movie, it would be legitimized in a way. And I have totally reversed course on that because to me, video games are just as legitimate an art form as films. There is no leap to be had there. Maybe it felt a little more that way because we were looking at Lego people and not like nothing that resembled a real human being. But now they do. And so that just doesn't seem necessary to me anymore. The performances are just as incredible, just as heartfelt, just as emotional in games as they are in films. From actors, like real actors on set with each other, doing performance capture. Like there's just less and less reason I see as time goes on for the necessity to do so, unless you're just trying to talk to people who won't play the game. Because the people who did play the game, you're just missing like a key component of what made that so great by losing the gameplay aspect, the participation. So I saw this and it's not even a thing where I felt nothing about it. Like I felt nothing one way or the other. It's like, okay, that's a thing and that'll come out and I probably won't watch it. Or if I do, then cool, I'll reevaluate at the time, but I'm not even going to spend any time thinking about that at the moment.
I mostly just hope it doesn't affect the games at all. Like the movie will come out, whether it succeeds or not, no matter what happens, I hope the next Zelda game is entirely unaffected by whatever the result of this movie are. Because I could see if it's successful, then it's like, oh, now we've got this actor. Like, who's it going to be? Who's it going to be, man? Is it Zac Efron? Is Zac Efron going to be Link?
I don't know. Probably not. He's too old.
Oh, okay, who's popular now? I don't know who's popular.
Good question.
Who are the big shots nowadays? Like Tom Holland or whatever. It doesn't matter. I just hope that it doesn't affect the games, is mostly what I'm saying.
Yeah. All right, let's do one more, and then we'll stop there. This one comes from Fausto. Hi, guys. Love your content. The Outer Wilds is a game I found really interesting, but don't have the patience for it. Just wasn't my style, so I was glad I could experience the game through your podcast. As for the question, I've noticed mainly during the Xenogears series that I struggle to find deeper meaning or symbolism in games. What do you recommend I can do to get better at this? I think this comes from gaming in the 1990s where there was a strong separation between gameplay and story. For example, in RPGs, I feel that when I go into battle, there's no story or meaning behind it. It's just what you have to do to get to the next real story, the cutscenes. So I'm going to say something real quick, and then I'll pass on to Kaysen, who have a lot more to say. As with anything, the only way you can learn to recognize it is to be familiar with it in the first place. So you'll have to do some study on symbolism, and ancient cultures to kind of understand how they used symbols and why in the first place, before you can start recognizing them in, in a game or in a movie or something like that. So it would take legitimate like work and research on your part that would be, months, if not years long, before you'd really start to get to a point of familiarity with these symbols to start recognizing them. So that's true with anything. If you want to become good at something, you have to practice it a lot. You have to ingratiate yourself in it, and really, do the work behind that. Second thing I want to say is that you have to kind of start flipping your thinking on that latter part of it too, where, and I was the same way. I think everybody was when we were younger, especially. The gameplay and the story are separate, and a lot of that had to do with how games were reviewed. Like game reviewers, they always separated the gameplay and the story as almost two separate things to be analyzed, rather than trying to, see how they worked together as a whole. That's one thing that we're trying to do a little bit. Of course, we focus more on the story on our podcast, but how does the storytelling, or how does the gameplay also supplement that storytelling, is one of the chief things that I'm interested in when it comes to game design these days. And so start looking at, okay, why did they use that battle transition? Why does the screen shatter like glass? Is that just an effect because it's cool? Because it's sudden and it's, we're interrupted in our exploration of the world here. Why did they use that? Is there a motif that you see in other places in the cutscenes that you're watching that connect that? Why would they use that screen transition? You have to start thinking about these things. You have to be purposeful in being like, okay, pause. Why did they do that? Let me think about that. Let me, look into that a little deeper. No, all right, now I'll pass it on to you.
That's really good. I think a lot of times people enter modern art, especially, with the assumption, specifically video games and movies and all this stuff, with the assumption that most of the things don't really mean anything, that you're just playing the game. And that's the assumption I think that you need to change as you're playing the game, is the assumption that, how would I put it? You need to assume that everything you see means something. Now, that's likely not correct, right? Some things are just there because they're there. But if you start to see the world assuming that these things are here intentionally, these things are put here on purpose, what could it be saying? Instead of, the way you normally play a game, which is, unless it explicitly points it out to me, I'm not going to read anything into this. I'm not going to assume that this means anything more important, right? But you have to start with the baseline assumption that everything you see was put there intentionally, because to some degree it was. Now, whether it's saying something deeper, you're going to have to look into that. But even if you're playing FF7 and there's like trash on the street, what is that saying, right? If you see graffiti on the wall, what is that saying? Not physically, what is it saying? What is the fact that there's graffiti at all saying, right? So just if you assume that everything means something, you'll start seeing things that you didn't see before. And then you're going to have to scale that back, because everything doesn't mean something usually. You're going to have to scale that back a bit, but that'll get you to start looking in different places. And as you start noticing different things, you'll start realizing, okay, that square didn't probably actually mean much there, and this circle here wasn't that important. But whenever they use this triangle, it's always accompanied by something else. So I don't know, maybe triangles mean something in this game. The biggest thing for me, though, is to this is going to sound, I don't know how deep I should go into this one, but to see symbolism in your life. That's probably the best way that I see symbolism now, especially in video games, is to start with that same assumption that I just told you about. That this, I don't know, if a lot of people who listen to us are atheists, I understand that. But if you just have the assumption that everything you see when you go for a walk was placed there intentionally, everything in the forest, everything in the world, the stars, especially the stars. If you get this mindset of everything here means something, what does it mean, right? That's going to translate to the art that you consume. That's going to because this is why medieval people were so obsessed with things like symbolism, right? They would go to church every day sometimes, mostly at least every week. And they were inundated with this idea that the cosmos means something. It all has meaning. And then they would go about their lives farming, and the soil and the stars at night and the plants, and everything means something, right? And we don't have that in modern society anymore. People tend not to be as religious, tend not to go to church as much, tend not to think that the universe is speaking to them, unless you're like a hippie. I don't know. But for the most part, a lot of people tend not to have this experience of the world that people have had for a long time, and that artists are still trying to convey, because every game that you play, things are intentionally put there. But then you try to live this life where, oh, nothing's intentional and everything's just random, right? But there's a disconnect when you do that. And if you're able to find some way of connecting your real life with a story that means something, then you're going to start to see that in the art as well, because that's exactly what artists are doing. And most artists will tend to draw from a tradition or a religion or something like that for their symbolism. And that's part of the reason that that I've been able to read a lot of symbolism, and Mike as well. The environment that we were raised in was very much that type of an environment. And I still feel like I live in that world, right? Where everything means something, and I can go out and look at the stars and have a deeply meaningful experience. The way that most people would be like Pumbaa from The Lion King, saying, "Oh, that's just a burning ball of gas floating billions of miles away. Like, it doesn't mean anything to me." But in my opinion, that's wrong. So
yeah. All right. Thank you, everybody, for your questions. We really appreciate you. There was a few more I had, but we don't have time to get to them today. I just want to say again, it really does mean a lot to us that so many of you have, in these last few years, reached out to us, supported our channel. It's been one of the most humbling experiences of my life. Going back maybe full circle to the first, not the first question, but one of the first, about getting over your imposter syndrome or your fear about not being adequate enough, right? A lot of things that we've received in the course of us being on YouTube has been a lot of criticism, and maybe even harsh criticism or hate, you might call it. But the vast majority has been really supportive and genuine connections with people that we never would have found otherwise. And that has been the driving motivation for why I continue. The people that we meet, we talk to, that we've brought on our podcast and had on as guests, have been some of the most profoundly interesting humans I have ever encountered. And that never would have happened without the support of the audience, without you guys watching, sharing, commenting, reaching out to us, and of course supporting us so that we can continue to try to make the show better. So thank you to everyone who does that, particularly the patrons who asked these questions today. And we hope you're ready for Tactics Ogre next week. I hope I'm ready for Tactics Ogre next week. I hope I have more time to get around to it. But we're going to do our best. So thank you very much for tuning in, and we'll see you again next time. Peace out.